So my midterm rental consulting clients have been complaining about Furnished Finder not working particularly well for them for about the last 12 months. And a few reoccurring themes that I'm hearing in these calls are that the unmatched leads just aren't converting. So they'll get a lead, they'll respond, nothing ever happens, or they'll get a lead and just it never goes anywhere. And or if they connect with someone, the person that they connect with is really trying to lowball them. So it's not like $100 off, but it'll be like 50% off. And in midterm rentals, it's understandable, it's normal for the tenant to try and negotiate their rate, but that should be like $100 or $200 depending on the length of the stay and the attractiveness of the tenant, not like a 40 or 50% discount. That's sort of outside the norm. And it certainly gets into an area where it doesn't even make sense to be doing a rental, much less a midterm rental. And the third complaint I'm seeing in the forums is just the increase in Furnished Finder's costs. So Furnished Finder used to be $99 per property, and now Furnished Finder is $149 per property. And then you can do a $99 add-on if you have an accessory dwelling unit or some kind of other space that shares the same address as the initial property. If it has two different addresses, each of those properties are going to be $149.99 to be on the platform. So those are the three big complaints that I'm hearing from consulting clients. And then I have a few thoughts as well around why Furnished Finder hasn't been as effective of a tool as it used to be. So I used to have a lot of success on Furnished Finder, and this was true between 2017 to about midway through 2022, and then it became less successful. And I think a big reason why Furnished Finder is not as effective is its reliance on traveling nurses, and here's a proof point for that. Now, you certainly can use Furnished Finder if you're not a nurse or a traveling nurse, but it's understandable why people are confused about it because they talk about traveling nurses all through their website. So before I go further, let's talk about today's agenda and what this video is going to address. So first, we're going to talk about the issues of having a platform that's tied in directly with traveling nurses and the issues that that causes. Second, we're going to talk about the competition on the platform. Third, we're going to talk about what to realistically expect for your midterm rental rates and how to find that information. And fourth, we'll talk about a good filtering strategy that should help you get tenants. So the first and most major issue with being reliant on nurses is that it's bad business. What I mean by this is if you were planning on going to Washington, D.C. in June for a vacation, you wouldn't look for a website that only flies lawyers or only flies nurses or only flies doctors or only flies students. And it would be dumb of the airlines to do that because everybody's money spends the same regardless of what their profession is. And with this, we don't go after niche websites when it comes to booking planes. I like to use kayak.com. I know other people like to use Google Flights. Maybe you're going to go to United or one of the big airlines and just book through there. What you're not going to do is book a flight off of a social media account. So your property does not need its own social media, nor are you going to look for a niche website around airlines. And the same is true for your rental. A lot of you have been introduced to midterm rentals through thinking about renting to traveling nurses or people with insurance claims. But that's bad strategy because you're limiting who you're going after. Really, there are many demographics that want your property, and so you don't want to be advertising specifically to one because you might inadvertently alienate the other demographics. And so that's the problem with going after nurses, and it's a real problem with Furnished Finder because people don't know if they can use the website if they're not a nurse. So this presents a problem for you as the host because there's confusion not only on the host side, but also on the tenant side as to who can use Furnished Finder. Before we jump off nurses, just a couple of other issues with them are the vaccine came out, urban areas haven't needed nurses as much, and consequently they're not making as much money, which is part of the reason why we're seeing the lowballing. Finally, their contracts are getting canceled. So you're seeing a lot of nurses ask for flexibility on the first week or two so that they can cancel their stay. Now, if you want to go after nurses, this is a great thing to offer them and to make your rental more attractive to nurses. Then just know that that vacancy is going to fall to you if they have to cancel and you have to refund their money. You now have an empty place because the nurse can't keep the contract and you have to scramble to find a new tenant. This video, if you feel like you're learning something, if you are looking for content around being a midterm host and or self-property management, including questions around tenants, insurance, the platforms, I recommend subscribing to this channel channel because you'll get notifications every time I put out a new video. And finally, if you're looking for consulting, I offer one-to-one packages. You can find the link in the description all about you and all about your property and your goals and your numbers, etc. So good news is only 5.5% of the United States has a second home, so a rental property, meaning that if you have a rental property, and even if you don't have a rental property and you're just doing arbitrage, you're way ahead of a lot of people. I mention that because sometimes people are really harsh on themselves, and I just want to say it doesn't matter if you have 10 doors or 5 doors or 100 doors. If you have one door, you should be very proud of yourself. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a scary thing to do. Confidence in the fact that you've gotten in the game and so many others haven't. With that said, I think another problem with Furnished Finder specifically, and any kind of niche website, so whether it's Furnished Finder or Corporate Housing by Owner or any of the nursing travel sites, is that niches in real estate and other places only work if no one else knows about them. And so that's why I think Furnished Finder was successful for me in the past, why it was likely successful for a lot of the creators that talk about it in the past. There weren't as many hosts, so you didn't have this outsized competition for this little demographic. You probably had a bigger demographic of renters, traveling nurses, than you did hosts. And now that's flipped. So you have outsized competition on these platforms, and it's just not that easy to be successful. And again, I'm mentioning this just so you don't feel bad, like it's not you, it's a problem with the platform, and it's a problem with the awareness of the space. Which takes us into our next section, which is what will rent and what is a realistic number. I've been doing this since 2017 with my husband. I have a 92% occupancy rate, and I tend to get 40 to 65% above long-term unfurnished. And since I have taken on consulting clients, I am continuing to have that success, and I'm doing it nationwide. So I don't think it's limited to me or geography or a certain type of property. I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I think the main problem with a lot of rentals is their marketing and their pricing. So I typically get 40 to 65% above, and that depends on seasonality. It also depends on amenities and how the property presents. So a really sharp looking property is going to pull in way more money than a property with cobbled together furniture. Now, if you have cobbled together furniture, don't be down on yourself. It's an economy property at that point. It's not a luxury property. And there's all sorts of tenants for different types of properties. One stat here, 37% of the United States rents. So somebody will want your property. It's economy or if it's luxury, it doesn't matter. There is a tenant out there for you. You have to market it correctly and you have to price it correctly. When we talk about marketing it correctly, it means talk about the amenities that matter to that tenant and not random or subjective things. An example of a subjective thing, that's subjective thing, is spacious, light-filled, comfy, etc. That's not a good description of anything. What is much more useful is to be very specific about what your property has. So washer, dryer in unit, dishwasher in unit, free parking. Pricing, you should be looking 40 to 65% above and then comparing on Airbnb and seeing if that makes sense seasonally and after they put their rates on. I necessarily love hearing this, which is very strange to me, but I was listening to a nutrition podcast and a guy was saying the same thing about nutrition. He was saying people don't like hearing that it's actually much easier than they think. They want the secret sauce. They want the advantage that nobody else has. Your advantage is that you're in the game. You have the property. Just like when we talk about dieting or nutrition, the real secret is calorie reduction, right? There's different ways to get to that. So you could fast or you could eat high protein or low carb, but ultimately it's calorie reduction that's going to make you lose weight. And in rental properties, it's the more eyes you have on the property and being on the bigger platforms versus the smaller platforms. And then finally, let's get to our fourth section of this video, which is a filtering strategy that actually works. So in this example, we have a 2-bedroom rental in Azusa, and it's a midterm rental because we're renting from July 1st through September 30th. And if we just put in a 2-bedroom rental without a lot of parameters, we get 709 results back. Now, if we allow for one dog, it drops down to 335 results. If we allow for 2 dogs, it drops to 308. A quick note on this, the default for Airbnb is 5 dogs. So just make sure that you go in and modify that. And if that was helpful, like this video. In case I've dropped it to 2 dogs, because I think a lot of people travel not just with 1 dog, but with 2 dogs. But in this case, that's not necessarily a great filter. Just allowing animals knocks out half of your competition, but adding a second dog doesn't necessarily help with that. Okay, so now if we add a pool, it drops it down to 58 results. So that's very powerful. And then finally, if we add a king on top of that, down to 30. So the whole point of this exercise is if you're about to list your midterm rental, go in and mess with the filters and see what drops down your competition or knocks out a lot of your competition, and then add that and also put it in the headline because it will be powerful. A lot of people want it, but not a lot of people are offering it. So anybody that has a pool should be advertising that they have a pool. Anybody with a king bed should be advertising that they have a king bed.